Hello again, and welcome to the second half of the Samson story and the last in our series on the book of Judges. The last we heard of Samson, he had departed in a great fury from his own wedding celebration. What happens next? Sometime later, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I am going into my wife's room." But her father would not let him go in. "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion." Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." In some modern Arabic communities, there is a custom called the Sadiqa marriage. In this, the unusual feature is that the woman continues to live in her parental home and the husband only visits his wife at intervals, bringing gifts. If Samson had an arrangement similar to this, then it explains his return to Timnah, assuming that his wife was still available to him, and also explains his rage at finding that she was not. The time marker that opens the story is a significant one. It was the time of the wheat harvest. Now, Philistia had an agricultural economy, and Samson's stroke of revenge is going to be as strategic as the assault on New York's Twin Towers on 9/11. Interesting also is what Samson says about the revenge he is going to undertake. "This time, when I do mischief on the Philistines, I will be without blame." It suggests that Samson is aware that his doings at Ashkelon were irresponsible, particularly for a judge of Israel. Still, this does not prevent him from repeating another act of personal revenge, again precipitated by his own misconduct. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. The action is described in a seamless sequence of 8 verbs, suggesting how smoothly Samson performed this incredible operation single-handed. Why did he tie the foxes up tail to tail? One explanation for the strategy is that single foxes would escape in straight lines and manage to extinguish the torches, perhaps. Tied to one another, they would zigzag through the fields, stopping periodically to attempt to disengage from each other, and this would maximize the damage. Then the Philistines asked each other, "Who did this?" They were told, "Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion." So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Samson said to them, "Since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. In response, the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they answered, "to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." The sequence of action and reaction is summed up in Samson's words. "I merely did to them what they did to me." While God intended Samson to lead his people in war, he dissipated his energies in a personal feud. Then the Israelites said to Samson, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. And as he approached Lehi, the Philistines came towards him, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson composed this poem in celebration of his victory. With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. Whatever might be Samson's motivation in these battles, in the background, God is working away quietly on the main job of delivering Israel. 1,000 Philistines fall that day. Yet, what we see here is that Samson's self-interest and his total disregard for his Nazirite vow become even more explicit. We note that the weapon of his choice in this battle is a jawbone, and at that, a fresh jawbone. Another violation of the Nazirite vow that lays upon him the restriction of touching anything dead. With this, the first half of Samson's judgeship ends. Israel was led by Samson for 20 years, we are told, but we know the quality of that leadership. The second half of the Samson story mirrors the first and begins with an excursion into Philistine territory. The story begins, one day Samson went to Gaza. Gaza? We wonder what Samson is doing in Gaza, which was the southernmost of the 5 Philistine cities and a good 45 miles from his hometown. But by now, we know that Samson is uncontrollable, going and coming as he pleases. This wild nature is best seen in the women associated with Samson. While his pious mother was picked by God, the ones he picks are not only all Philistine, but further slide from wife to prostitute to undercover agent. So, one day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn, we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the 2 posts and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. At Gaza, Samson gives us another show of strength. From excavations at the Philistine city of Ashdod, we understand that city gates were part of a complex. Guard rooms rising 2 or 3 stories flanked the tunnel-like approach to the gates. Thus, Samson would have had to fight his way past several groups of guards in a confined tunnel space to get to the place where he could tear the gates off the walls. He then carries these 40 miles uphill from coastal Gaza to upland Hebron. Why does the narrator include this incident? Besides affirming Samson's willful way of life, this story alerts us that Samson has spared no effort to antagonize Philistia. From Timnah to Ashkelon to Gaza, the enemy seeks his head. What is tragic is that the city of Gaza, from which he escapes so effortlessly, will one day become his prison. Now, we come to what reads like an espionage story. It has all the elements of what is called a honey trap. A superhero, a desirable female agent, love, money, death, and even a twist in the tale. This is how this story goes. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Delilah means flirtatious. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure this Samson into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." The Philistine lords have realized that Samson is not just a poser of riddles, but a riddle that they must solve at any cost. As for the cost of this riddle-solving project, it is 1,100 shekels of silver multiplied by at least 5 for the 5 Philistine cities. This is more than 3 times the weight of gold that Gideon earned as spoils of war against Midian in 826. Everything about Samson is spectacular. His birth, his feats of strength, and even the price on his head. His life will end similarly. So one day Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah said to Samson, "All this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric on the loom, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when you won't even confide in me? This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she nagged him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So, he told her everything. 3 repetitive cycles. In the first cycle, Samson is treating Delilah's request as a joke. He has a made-up magical formula for losing his strength. 7 fresh thongs, he says, meaning the tendons taken from an animal just slaughtered. Notice that for the umpteenth time, Samson has trivialized the Nazirite regulations. In the next round, he gives Delilah a more probable answer. "New ropes," he says. Perhaps this is in recollection of his recent treatment at the hands of his people. Didn't they tie him up with ropes to hand him over to the Philistines? Dealing with ropes is not a challenge to Samson. And then in the third and final round, he comes closer to the truth. He mentions his hair. In sporting with Delilah, Samson has begun to play with fire. This third solution to the riddle is the most elaborate to arrange. We must imagine that as Samson is lying asleep on the floor, no other judge sleeps as much as he does. Delilah calls for a loom and sets it up close to his head. The loom contains half-woven fabric into whose threads Delilah now adds Samson's long hair. When she is done, she secures the thread hair fabric with a weaver's pin. Given that the loom was usually anchored into the ground, it would amaze the ancient reader that Samson was able to uproot the whole apparatus just by the strength of his hair. After this, Delilah literally nags him to death. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as any other man." The confession Samson makes is remarkable. It makes clear to us that Samson was perfectly aware of his Nazirite status. His security lay in the knowledge that as long as his hair remained, he was undefeatable. He took his adherence to one regulation, his hair, as insurance for toying with all other regulations, for even toying with his life's calling. The tragic consequences of this are a double loss. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines. "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. The consequences of his actions, as we said, are a double loss. Not only does his strength leave him, but what is more, with this final violation, the Lord leaves him. So insensitive has he been to God that he does not recognize either loss. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Look how this judge, with the greatest potential of all, is cast down into the lowest possible place. Following common customs for the humiliation of prisoners of war, the Philistines blind him and force him into a task meant for women and slaves, grinding at the mill. His lifelong blindness to his mistakes now becomes physical and literal. In this darkest moment for Israel and for Samson, a ray of hope shines through. Samson's hair, we are told, begins to grow again. We should understand here that Samson's strength doesn't exactly lie in his long hair. What we are being told here is that God is binding Samson to himself all over again with the Nazirite vow. God hasn't released Samson from delivering Israel. His hair, as a Nazirite's should, begins to grow again. Till now, it has been Samson who has been composing poems against the Philistines. Now, the last poem of Samson's life story is a Philistine victory chant against him. The rulers of the Philistines assemble to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." Typical of the way the ancient world thought, the Philistines attribute the victory to their god of grain and harvest, Dagon. The painful implication is that they think Yahweh has been defeated. And now the people have gathered to celebrate in a temple. And while they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. Samson has turned into a circus act. And while he was standing among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, remember, he is blind now, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Is Samson merely tired, or is there a plot hatching? Now, the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Now Samson has been led to the pillars that support the temple, and putting his hands on the pillars, pretending to lean against them for support, Samson prayed to the Lord. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Samson calls out to God for aid. In Hebrew idiom, the word remember is not the opposite of the word to forget. Rather, it appeals to the one addressed, in this case God, to take note and act on the behalf of the one making the prayer. Samson is asking God to act on his behalf. Samson's last prayer sums up the man. As always, he is blind to the larger designs of God and sees only opportunity for personal revenge. In an utterance of 18 Hebrew words in this prayer, he uses the first person 5 times. As always, only he matters to himself. Then Samson reached towards the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Samson's last exclamation is, "Let me die with the Philistines." He dies in the company that he lived with all his life. He dies without completing Israel's liberation. It is interesting that of the many leaders in the Old Testament who asked to die, Moses, Elijah, Jeremiah, Jonah, it is only the death wish of Samson that God grants. Perhaps Samson's suicide is a logical end for the whole institution of judgeship, as seen within the book of Judges. Increasingly unstable, the institution has now self-destructed. The Samson story resounds with echoes from previous cycles in the book, and none of them are to Samson's credit. If Jael delivers Israel by driving a tent peg into the enemy's head, here the enemy ironically fastens the deliverer's head with a weaver's pin. If the judgeships of Gideon and Jephthah contained isolated incidents of personal revenge, Samson's entire career is a chain of retaliatory acts. If Jephthah misguidedly keeps his vow, Samson violates every clause of the Nazirite vow repeatedly. If you don't include Abimelech, the self-elected judge, Samson is the only judge in this book to die in battle with the enemy. With that, we've come to the end of our series on the judges. There is one more judge to come, and that is Samuel, and we can save his story for another day. But for now, what is your takeaway from the stories that we have heard? The stories of 6 judges, and if you count Abimelech, the self-made judge, 7 judges. Think about it for a bit and come back. One theme that runs right across the stories of the judges is the theme of empowerment by the Spirit of God. The Spirit falls upon this judge or that, and then they go off and do this exploit or that. But we have noticed, haven't we, that increasingly the judges make personal gain their agenda. With Gideon, you remember how that story ended, with Gideon making himself more or less king over the Israelites and even ending up introducing idolatry into Israel. He started as the idol breaker but ended up as the idol maker, all because of personal gain. And then with Abimelech, you remember that his whole reign was driven by the motive of personal interest. And you know how that story ended. It ended in bloodshed, in the razing down of cities, and finally in his own suicide. And then there was Jephthah, and that was the most tragic story of all. Completely motivated by self-interest, he finally ended up sacrificing the one single child he had, his unmarried daughter. And then we come to the Samson story. Is there one thing that Samson does that is in the interest of the nation or in the interest of God? No. From start to finish, he works only for himself. And when he dies with revenge on his lips, personal revenge.
the Spirit of God does fall upon all these judges, and all these heroes do use the Spirit empowerment in faith. And that is why their names are mentioned in Hebrews 11 as heroes of faith. In the faith that God had empowered them, they went off and did great exploits. And these great exploits still fulfilled God's plan for the deliverance of Israel from the oppressor. But it's important for us to see that the judge himself suffered the consequences of their motives, of their personal agendas. Each one died an increasingly unhappy death. The most tragic of them all being Samson. We have to remember that God empowers all of us to do what we do, all our special skills and gifts and even our ordinary capabilities. God empowers us. And through us, God can still carry on His great work. But if our motives are not aligned with God's plans, then there are consequences to pay. The stories of the judges are a warning that there will always be consequences to our actions. And with that, we finish this book. Thank you for being part of this journey through the book of the Judges. God bless.